Well, as we have heard in our children's sermon this morning, and as we've heard in our gospel reading from Matthew, we encounter this well-known event in the ministry of Jesus and his disciples, where there's this bold proclamation that's made about who Jesus is. We're told that Jesus and his disciples, they are in the region of Caesarea Philippi, and Jesus begins to ask his disciples some questions. He first asks, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" The disciples respond that some think that he's the recently beheaded John the Baptist back from the dead, or maybe he's Elijah with his chariot of fire, or maybe Jeremiah or another prophet. Jesus then asks a second question, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon, soon to be called Peter, the ever bold, ever rash disciple, he pipes up, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." From here, Jesus blesses Simon, officially gives him the name Peter, which sounds a lot like the Greek word for rock, Petra. And then Jesus says a lot of stuff that theologians and biblical scholars have debated over the centuries. Jesus says, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." A lot of ink has been spilt debating what those verses mean. Is the rock the church that is the rock that the church is built on? Is that rock Peter and the people who will inherit his title? Is that rock Peter and eventually the other apostles who will steward the faith? Is that rock the actual confession of Jesus as Christ that Peter boldly says? Those are all interpretive questions that we could address. Then there's the binding and the loosing. Is this talking about church discipline or priests pronouncing forgiveness of sins, or is this talking about spiritual warfare? A lot can be said in response to these questions, and a lot has been said, and a lot should be said. They're important interpretive questions. And I thought at the beginning of the week that I would like to dive into one of those questions. And I'm sure so many of you want me to dive into all of those deep theological questions surrounding those verses. But as I read through the passage, there was a more pressing question that I felt was being asked. And it's that second question that Jesus asks his disciples. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? There are two questions that Jesus asks his disciples, and they're meant to be held together. Jesus begins with the question, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Everything about this question is broad. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? People can be anyone. They're just this faceless, nameless group of people. There's nothing distinct or particular about them. It's just people. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Son of Man. Jesus gets a little bit more particular, but it's still pretty removed. Son of Man is this theological title. It has religious connotations, maybe political connotations. It's a term that has a sort of messianic feeling to it, but it's not tied to a particular person. It's more of the idea of a particular person. So the question Jesus asks, if we can paraphrase it a little bit, sounds like this. Who do people, the crowd, the mob, this nameless, faceless group, who does this group say that the Son of Man, this religious figure in history, who do they say that this Son of Man is? When I hear this question, there's a feeling of distance that I get. People have all sorts of thoughts about who the Son of Man is. When we hear the title Son of Man, we probably think of Jesus. For Christians, the Son of Man is Jesus. But often, we can have these vague ideas of who Jesus is. I think about those specials that come on TV around the holidays or around Easter that talk about Jesus and who he was. Those ones that kind of get put out on network television. And there's this kind of mysterious identity to Jesus. Like, we don't know a whole lot for sure about this man, but we know that he was important, and we know that whatever he did changed the world. And there's a hesitancy to say anything boldly about who Jesus is, because the special is probably trying to say just enough to keep everybody happy, Christians and non-Christians alike. So you get this vague understanding of who Jesus is. It turns out that people have a lot of thoughts about who Jesus is, and it's easiest if you just keep things general and acknowledge what most people agree with. He existed, he taught us to love each other, he died, and a significant movement began after his death. It's easiest to just keep things up there. It's easy to keep things general when it comes to the identity of the Son of Man. It's easy for crowds to talk about that identity. That's what they were doing in the time of Jesus. Who do people say that the Son of Man is? Maybe John the Baptist, maybe Elijah, maybe Jeremiah, maybe another prophet. There's a lot of debate about who the Son of Man is. There's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of dialogue. But then Jesus asks that second question to his disciples. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? All of a sudden, the generalized conversation about the Son of Man, the debates about who this person is, all of a sudden it becomes personal and it becomes particular. Who do you say that I am? You. When I was in preaching class, there was a common thought that preachers should heavily rely on pronouns that involve the speaker, the preacher, in the group that is being spoken to. And so you'll hear pronouns like we, us, and our being favorites. The church is a community, so it seems like the preacher should talk about the group and not separate himself or herself from that group. There's a hesitancy to use the pronoun you because it sounded like you were scolding somebody. I think many of us have been in sermons where there's some preacher who has a long finger pointed out to the congregation saying, you, we know what that feels like. But as I got into ministry, I quickly realized that there's a lot of ministry that involves us as a group, but there's a whole lot that involves you and I. And there are times when I have to talk to you directly. You all who are making up your minds about who God is and how you're going to relate to that God. That is what Jesus does here. He moves from talking about a general group of people having a religious debate to talking to his disciples. Who do you all, it's kind of y'all, in its second person plural, who do y'all think that I am? I. Jesus now stands outside of his group of disciples. It is not us or we, it is you and I. And he invites them to make up their minds about him. Not make up their minds about the Son of Man, not have a sophisticated, nuanced religious dialogue about who Jesus is. Jesus just asked point blank, who do you say that I am? And Simon, he answers, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter, through the work of God, through the revelation of God, has made up his mind. He dares to answer the question that everyone is debating, everyone is pondering. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus asks a particular question, a direct question, and Simon answers with a direct statement. Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed King who has arrived to save Israel. Now, Simon Peter looks great in this passage. He won't look so good next week. Stay tuned for next week. Next week, Simon Peter is going to try to convince Jesus to not go to the cross, and Jesus will famously tell Simon Peter to get behind me, Satan. So, that's coming up. That's the passage that immediately follows this one. So, how quick the tables turn. But for now, Simon Peter is the one who is bold enough to say who he thinks Jesus is. He's willing to stick out his neck and answer the question. And because he does that, because he boldly says, you are the Christ, he identifies Jesus, he says who Jesus is. Jesus then turns to him and says that line about the rock. So his name is Simon Bar Jonah. He's Simon, the son of Jonah. But then we're told that Jesus turns to him and says, "You are Peter." As I said before, Peter, it sounds like rock. It sounds like that word. And he may have been called this as like a nickname or something. Like that may have been part of his, like, you know, we all have nicknames. But the thing that I find really interesting about this whole thing is that Peter makes this proclamation of who Jesus is. And then Jesus tells Jesus who he is. And then Jesus turns to Peter and tells him who he is because of that. Simon is Peter. Simon is rock. Simon is this new person through which Jesus is going to work. It's upon Peter will go out and become this bold apostle, someone who will be the leader of the church in Jerusalem, the message of the gospel will go out through him. It doesn't make him any better than anybody else who's in this group, but his identity is changed by this proclamation by Jesus. Are we willing to allow that to happen to us? Are we willing to say who Jesus is and then have it change us as people? Am I willing to stand in the disciples' place and hear those words, "Who do you say that I am?" Who do I say that Jesus is? Do I say that he's a good teacher, that he's a good example, he's someone who I can rally behind? Is he someone who is just going to help me in my life? Or do I say, you are the Christ, you are the Messiah, you are the one who lays a claim on my life, and that's going to change who I am. You are Christ, the Son of the living God. The church is not group of people who gather together to enjoy time together and hear some religious information and then go home and be good people the rest of the week. The church is a group of people who have been called into this strange reality of being in union with Christ, the Son of God, who speaks in the language of you and I, who calls you, who calls me, who calls y'all, who calls us, who saves you, who saves me, who dwells with you, who dwells with me. Jesus does not call a generic group of people to follow a generic Savior. He calls us, you and I, to live in union with him. That is Christianity. Christ, the Son of God, making himself known, and you and I responding to that through knowing him. This is not vague spirituality. This is not a vague form of Christianity. It's a Christianity that has teeth. It's the living God showing up and showing us who he is, and that changing a fundamental reality of who we are. So today, I close with that question that Jesus asks. There are lots of people who say lots of things about the Son of Man. There are lots of people who say lots of things about Jesus. But who do you say that Jesus is? Amen.